The second season begins with Ginny after she escapes with Austin to live at their father's home. At night, she dreams that her mother is coming after her, haunted by the investigator's words that Georgia is a murderer. Ginny spends sleepless nights thinking about justice, guilt, and the weight of what she knows, too scared and ashamed to talk to anyone about her mother's crime. Meanwhile, Georgia is furious and confused, not understanding why her daughter ran away. She feels that Ginny never appreciated the sacrifices she made, how hard she worked to give her kids a decent life. Paul tries to calm her, suggesting that Ginny might just be struggling to accept her mother's new marriage, but Georgia is certain there's more to it. Back with Ginny, she can't stop replaying the day she saw her mother poison Kenny's drink. Overwhelmed by anger and guilt, she burns herself with a lighter, the same destructive way she's always punished herself when emotions spiral out of control. When Thanksgiving arrives, every family gathers together. Georgia heads to Paul's family home to meet his parents for the first time, while Ginny spends the day with her dad Zion and her grandparents. But she can't enjoy it or talk to anyone. Georgia, on the other hand, tries her best to impress Paul's family, wanting to prove herself worthy of the wealthy political circle she's marrying into. But that night, she overhears Paul's parents urging him to reconsider marrying her, saying she's nothing like them, divorced, with 2 kids, and clearly not maternal enough, since no good mother would spend Thanksgiving away from her children. Paul defends her, telling them to stay out of his life because his choices are his own. Georgia hears the whole conversation, but pretends she didn't, walking away with a smile on her face. Meanwhile, Zion's parents say goodbye to Ginny and Austin, but before leaving, they talk privately with Zion, encouraging him to keep the kids with him. They believe Ginny needs stability and a normal life, something she'll never have with a selfish mother like Georgia. Ginny overhears everything and breaks down, realizing everyone sees her mother for who she truly is. Shortly after, Georgia calls Zion, furious that Ginny and Austin spent Thanksgiving away from her. She insists he bring them back the next day so they can make up for the missed holiday, and Zion agrees, saying he'll try to convince Ginny to return. After a while, Ginny comes downstairs, and her father tells her that her mother had called to check on her and wanted to see them. Ginny refuses completely, going into a hysterical fit, yelling that she won't go, and begging him to tell Georgia she's sick and can't make it. Zion is shocked by her reaction, unable to understand why she's so angry with her mother. Suddenly, Ginny collapses to the floor in a panic attack, struggling to breathe. Zion rushes to her side and calmly guides her through breathing exercises until she recovers. Once she's able to speak again, Ginny asks how he knew what to do. He explains that her mother used to have the same panic attacks and that he learned how to help her back then. Hearing that, Ginny becomes upset and starts crying before finally confessing that she hurts herself by burning her skin. Zion is stunned, but tries to stay calm and supportive, telling her they can get her real help through therapy. He insists that Georgia needs to know about this, but Ginny snaps, telling him to act like a father without letting Georgia control him like she controls everyone else. Zion tells her that this isn't about control. It's about being her mother and having a right to know what's going on. Furious, Ginny storms off. The next day, Zion takes Ginny and Austin back to Georgia's house, where Paul is also present. Zion decides to stay for the day. Ginny goes to return Marcus's motorcycle, which she took without telling him. Marcus thanks her, clearly affected by her absence, but Ginny stays distant, prompting him to mirror her coldness. By chance, Ellen, Marcus's mother, sees them together and realizes Ginny had stolen and ridden her son's bike alone. She storms over to confront Georgia, accusing her of being irresponsible. Georgia apologizes and insists she didn't know, but Ginny blurts out that she was wearing a helmet, revealing that Zion taught her to ride. Georgia glares at Zion, angry that he went behind her back. Later, they all sit together in tense silence. Ginny avoids eye contact with her mother until Georgia asks to speak to her privately. Georgia demands to know why Ginny keeps clinging to a father who wasn't there during any of the painful moments in their lives, reminding her of all the sacrifices she made and every struggle she faced alone to protect her. Zion walks in, ready to tell Georgia about Ginny's self-harm, but Ginny quickly interrupts, telling her mother she's decided to move back home, mainly to stop Zion from revealing the truth. The next day, Georgia returns from the election celebration, where Paul officially wins as mayor. But her joy vanishes when she finds the poisonous plant burned to ashes in the fire pit. That's when she realizes Ginny knows the truth. Meanwhile, the investigator discovers that Georgia was once married to a man named Anthony, who disappeared mysteriously not long after their wedding, and he begins to suspect she might have done to him the same thing she did to Kenny. Back at home, Ginny sits quietly in her room, lost in thought, until Marcus climbs through her window as usual. school. He admits he missed her, and the two decide to spend the night together. The next morning, Ginny is terrified to go back to school, convinced no one will accept her after finding out about her and Marcus. But Marcus promises he'll be by her side. In Georgia and Paul's room, the couple decides to move in together before the wedding. Georgia, however, has another motive. She hopes that by stirring up Ginny's emotions, she'll finally get her daughter to talk to her, even if it means provoking a fight. But Paul tells Georgia that moving in together might not be the right step for Ginny and Austin yet. Georgia insists it's a good idea, saying it'll help the kids adjust before they all move into his house permanently. Paul finally agrees, but asks that they tell the kids together. Later, Georgia watches Ginny brushing her teeth and tries to start a friendly conversation, but Ginny gives short answers and stays distant. So Georgia deliberately provokes her by mentioning that Paul will be moving in with them. Ginny simply says, "Congratulations," walks away, and leaves her mother standing there, furious and frustrated. At school, Ginny notices everyone staring at her strangely. Maxine and her friends whisper and laugh loudly to get under her skin. When Ginny sees Hunter, he refuses to talk to her, turning his face away, and when she spots Marcus sitting with his friends, they only wave briefly before continuing their conversation. Ginny feels completely isolated. Once the most popular girl, now she's an outcast. In class, the teacher asks about her absence. She lies and says she had a cold, so he tells Hunter to give her his notes, knowing he keeps detailed ones. Hunter silently hands them to her, and she quietly thanks him. Meanwhile, Georgia is at the mayor's office, and Nick confronts her, furious after discovering she embezzled from the office. He tells her to imagine how Paul will feel when he learns his fiancée stole from him. Georgia smirks and tells him he can go ahead and tell Paul if he wants, because she knows he won't. She points out that if she managed to steal under his watch, it means he's a terrible manager and therefore complicit. Nick is left speechless, knowing she's right. Later, Paul meets with Nick and Georgia suggests joining the neighborhood women's club to win more community support. Paul likes the idea, thinking it'll help his public image. Georgia then visits the club members, telling them she wants to join because she finally feels a sense of belonging and wants to build a stable life in the community. The members say she'll need approval from one of the founding members to be accepted. So Georgia decides to visit Cynthia, whose husband is gravely ill. Pretending her visit is out of concern, Georgia eventually admits the real reason. She needs Cynthia's support to join the club. Cynthia snaps, calling her manipulative and opportunistic. But Georgia opens up about how she's lived her whole life feeling alone and unstable, saying she finally wants to belong somewhere and create a real home. Cynthia softens slightly and says she'll think about it. Later, Cynthia meets with the club members and tells them she won't support Georgia's application, arguing that Georgia lacks class and moral standards. She criticizes her education level, her behavior, and her parenting, reminding them that Georgia's son stabbed her own child, Zach, with a pencil. The rest of the members agree, not wanting to oppose her. Meanwhile, Georgia walks down the street and unexpectedly runs into investigator P.I., who tells her he knows she's terrified of her perfect image collapsing and the world seeing her for what she really is, a cold-blooded criminal. He then reveals he's leaving town to visit the place where her first husband, Anthony, lived before he disappeared. He plans to uncover what really happened to him. Georgia's face tenses, but she pretends not to care and walks away. At the same time, Ginny goes to her therapy appointment, which her father arranged. She opens up to the therapist about the moments when she feels the urge to hurt herself, and through their conversation, she begins to understand what drives her to do it. Ginny goes back home with her father, and Georgia sees them together. She's clearly upset, partly because of how close Ginny is to Zion, and partly because she still hasn't been accepted into the neighborhood club. Later, while Ginny is in her room, Paul knocks on the door. He apologizes for moving in and tells her he hopes they can get along despite her tension with her mother. He adds that he knows she already has a great dad and would never try to replace him, but he wants to be a father figure to Austin, especially now that he's learned Austin's real father has been using his son's name to open fake credit cards. Ginny freezes, suddenly connecting the dots, and then asks Paul to leave so she can study. She tells him they can be friends. After he leaves, she checks her account and realizes most of her money is gone. The next morning, Georgia wakes up to find Paul eating breakfast at the table. When she asks what's going on, he says Ginny made him breakfast. Georgia then spots Ginny walking in wearing strange clothes and handing Paul a glass of juice, the same shade as the one that killed Kenny. She watches in horror as Paul drinks, but soon realizes it's just normal juice. Once he leaves, Georgia snaps at Ginny, telling her to stop acting out. Later, Georgia calls Austin and leaves the room, so Ginny takes the chance to open her mother's bag. Inside, she finds a credit card under Austin's name name and takes it. At school, she's moody and distracted, barely speaking to Marcus. After class, she comes home with a gift for Austin. Georgia is surprised and asks how she could afford it, so Ginny shows her the credit card she took. Georgia is furious, but hides it to avoid making a scene in front of Paul. When they're alone, she confronts Ginny in her room, saying she doesn't know how to deal with her anymore. Ginny mocks her, sarcastically saying she could just kill her, like she's done before. Georgia loses her temper, saying she doesn't trust her anymore, and storms out. The next day at school, Ginny runs into Abby, who's also been rejected by Maxine and the rest of the group for hiding Ginny and Marcus's relationship. The two outcasts decide to hang out together. They spend the afternoon dyeing their hair the same color as a way to rebel and annoy Maxine's group. Meanwhile, Georgia refuses to give up and plots her way into the club. She sneaks into the club's museum and steals an antique book, then visits the club pretending to know nothing about the theft. Acting concerned, she offers sympathy for the missing book. Later, she picks up Austin from school and secretly takes the toy Ginny bought him, placing it inside Zach's bag. Soon after, Georgia visits Cynthia's house, pretending to retrieve Austin's toy, and asks Cynthia to check Zach's bag. When Cynthia opens it, she's shocked to find the stolen antique book inside. Georgia feigns surprise and gently tells Cynthia to go easy on Zach, since his father is ill and the boy might not be thinking clearly. Then she offers to return the book to the museum herself, suggesting they say it arrived anonymously in the mail, in exchange for Cynthia's approval of her club membership. Feeling cornered, Cynthia reluctantly agrees. Georgia later returns home, proud of her scheme. Paul asks how she managed to convince Cynthia to accept her, and they laugh together, looking like a happy couple. Just then, Ginny walks in, and Georgia immediately comments on her new hair, saying it looks awful. Ginny smirks and says it's funny how happy they look pretending to be the perfect family. Paul, Georgia, Ginny, Austin, and Mary. Hearing that name, Georgia freezes. Mary is her real name, a part of her past she's buried for years. Paul asks who Mary is, but Georgia panics, breaks down, and rushes out of the house in tears, driving away in a complete breakdown. Ginny goes to Marcus's house to apologize for how she's treated him. She opens up and tells him everything her mother did. Marcus tries to comfort her, saying that if Kenny was a bad person, then maybe he deserved what happened. But Ginny gets angry, telling him no one deserves to die just because they're not a good person. Marcus explains that, in his eyes, Georgia's actions make sense. She's strong, fearless, and does whatever it takes to remove anything standing in her way. That only makes Ginny break down more, crying as she tells him she never wants to become like her mother. Later, Ginny returns home and finds Georgia crying in the car. She decides to approach her and asks directly why she killed Kenny. Georgia tells her that she might see her as the worst mother in the world and might even hate her forever. But she needs to understand one thing. Everything she does for her children. She says that whenever something threatens their future or could harm them, she eliminates it. She admits that she could literally take someone's life if it meant protecting them, because she spent her whole life being hurt and mistreated, wishing her own mother had stepped in to stop it. Georgia says that's why she decided to be different, to never let her kids suffer as she did, even if it means becoming the bad person herself. She tells Ginny she doesn't want her to be like her, but at least to know that she's loved, that every extreme thing she's ever done has been to make them feel safe, loved, and worthy. Ginny breaks down and hugs her mother, and they agree to stand together against the world. After some time, Georgia starts noticing Marcus sneaking into Ginny's room every night. One evening, she decides to confront them. She knocks first, and Ginny quickly hides Marcus in the closet before stepping out to talk. Georgia casually asks her to go buy something from the store. The moment Ginny leaves, Georgia opens the closet and tells Marcus to come out. She calmly sits him down and asks what exactly is going on between him and her daughter, and if he really loves her. When Ginny returns and realizes her mother tricked her just to talk to Marcus, she's furious and retreats to her room feeling betrayed. Later, Georgia tries to make peace, and they promise to stop keeping secrets from each other. The next day, Georgia also reconciles with Ellen, promising not to hide anything from her anymore. She even tells her about Marcus sneaking into Ginny's room every night, and the two mothers agree to handle it together, deciding they'll only allow the relationship if it becomes official and out in the open. The following day is Marcus and Maxine's birthday. Abby tries to make up with Maxine by planning a surprise party, but Maxine ruins it and refuses to talk to her. Abby feels humiliated, and the rest of the group becomes frustrated with Maxine's behavior, leaving her alone on her own birthday. Meanwhile, at the mayor's office, Paul launches his official website, and Georgia volunteers to manage it, but Nick strongly objects. The two argue intensely. At school, Abby and Ginny decide to skip class together, and Marcus joins them. Abby takes a photo of the three of them and posts it online, hoping Maxine will see it, get jealous, and realize she's gone too far. At Joe's cafe, Cynthia is there as usual, spending most of her time away from home because her husband's illness has reached the point where he no longer recognizes her or their son. Georgia shows up, announcing that she's organizing a fundraiser party at the neighborhood club and wants Joe to cater the event. Joe tells her he'll check his schedule, but it's clear he's still in love with her. Back home, Paul finds out Marcus has been sneaking into Ginny's room at night. Wanting to step up as a father figure, he insists on getting involved in the kids' lives and setting boundaries. But Georgia resists him at every turn, doing everything she can to keep control and maintain her distance. Paul decides to confront Georgia about how she constantly shuts him out of her family's life. He tells her he feels like an outsider, like she doesn't want him involved at all, not even in helping Austin, who has no father figure. Georgia fires back, saying he's no better, that he excludes her from work, even though she's proven herself capable countless times. Paul argues that work and home are different, but Georgia insists they're connected, especially since she's supposed to be his wife. She storms out of the room angry, goes to Ginny's room, and asks her to be her bridesmaid. Ginny agrees, congratulating her mom genuinely. That night, Ginny dances around listening to music, but the moment of joy collapses into tears as she breaks down, still haunted by what Georgia did to Kenny. She feels complicit, guilty for keeping the secret. Meanwhile, P.I. is in the town where Georgia's ex-husband Anthony used to live. He visits the police station, hoping to find anything related to the disappearance. The officer tells him Anthony used to run an illegal gambling operation, and after he went missing, Georgia was left to handle everything alone. When P.I. suggests Georgia might have killed him, the officer laughs, saying there's no way a young girl with a baby could murder a man and hide the body. P.I. warns him not to underestimate her. He's certain she's capable of anything. Back home, Georgia dances with Paul, Ginny, and Austin like they always do together as a family. Later, Ginny tells them she's going out for an hour. Georgia immediately knows she's headed to Marcus's house and secretly messages Ellen, asking her to check on them. At Marcus's, Ellen barges into the room, catching Marcus and Ginny off guard. Ginny realizes her mother set her up again. The next day, Ginny decides to make it up to Marcus by throwing him a birthday party at her house since she knows Georgia will be out with Paul. She invites all their friends from school. Maxine, seeing the group together, feels excluded and lashes out at Ginny, blaming her for ruining her friendships. Ginny stands her ground, telling Maxine the world doesn't revolve around her. Real friends support each other instead of imitating each other to keep secrets. Then she admits she loves Marcus and tried to stay away but couldn't because her feelings were real. Shocked, Maxine realizes Ginny truly loves her brother, apologizes to her, and makes peace with the whole group, finally accepting both Ginny's friendship and her relationship. That night, Ginny's house fills with people from school for Marcus's birthday party. Meanwhile, Georgia and Paul are at Joe's cafe. Paul notices Joe's lingering looks toward Georgia and starts to sense his feelings for her, while Georgia herself seems to notice it for the first time. Moments later, Zion calls Georgia saying Ginny isn't answering his messages. Realizing Ginny must be with Marcus, Georgia calls Ellen again and decides to head home. At the party, Ginny runs into Hunter. He apologizes, admitting he also played a part in their breakup, even though everyone painted her as the villain and the cheater. Ginny thanks him, and they reconcile as friends. Shortly after, Georgia arrives home with Paul, and with Marcus and Maxine's parents in tow. Everyone is kicked out of the house. Paul then takes a serious tone with Ginny, scolding her for her behavior and warning her not to repeat it. Georgia, unused to anyone disciplining her kids, chooses to let Paul handle it. Ginny is shocked. It's the first time she's ever actually faced real consequences for doing something wrong. She goes up to her room, emotionally overwhelmed, and once again, her thoughts spiral back to Kenny. Suddenly, she breaks down and suffers a panic attack. In desperation, she calls her therapist and for the first time admits that she isn't okay. Meanwhile, at the mayor's office, Paul begins planning what he and Georgia should do for Christmas. A group of elderly residents in the neighborhood approach Paul asking for a new irrigation system for the community garden, but he feels it's unnecessary. Georgia steps in and suggests organizing a winter charity event instead, one that would raise real supplies for poor families and orphans. Paul asks if she can really handle that, on top of planning both the club event and their wedding. Georgia smiles and tells him that if it's for the poor and the orphans, she can handle anything. Then the story flashes back to Georgia's past, a time when she was broke and struggling to feed Ginny as a little girl. Ginny tells her she's still hungry, so Georgia gives her the last of her own food and goes hungry herself for hours. At school, Ginny's teacher, who's subtly racist, assigns her the task of choosing a book by a black author to add to the curriculum as a form of representation. Ginny feels proud at first and tells her father, but Zion points out that it isn't her job to fix the system, that creating the curriculum is the teacher's responsibility, not hers. Ginny asks him what she should do, and he simply tells her he trusts she'll make the right choice. Meanwhile, Georgia decides to mend things with Nick. She apologizes for stealing money and threatening him and asks him to be her man of honor at the wedding, showing she wants a fresh start and truly means no harm to Paul. Nick agrees, touched by how much she seems to love Paul. Later, Georgia meets with the other moms at her house. They gossip about the teacher who got fired after being caught with an adult magazine in his desk. Abby turns to Ginny and asks if she's still about what happened with the book assignment. Georgia instantly picks up that someone's been bothering Ginny. Ginny panics, afraid her mother might retaliate against the teacher, since that's exactly what she does anytime someone hurts them. The conversation shifts to Georgia's upcoming club party, themed as a murder mystery night. Ginny finds the idea ironic and disgusting, considering her mom's past crimes, and decides not to attend. She tells Georgia she's going to Joe's Cafe instead to support Padma, who will be singing there and performing one of her spoken word poems, an emotional piece where she pours out her anger and heartbreak. The next day at school, Ginny hears from a friend that her mom is on campus. She rushes to check and finds Georgia sneaking around with a magazine, planning to plant it in the racist teacher's desk to get him fired. Ginny confronts her furiously, begging her to stop solving everything her way. She shouts that she doesn't need Georgia to destroy people for her. She just needs her to listen and be there. The teacher walks in suddenly, and Georgia hides the magazine before slipping out with Ginny. That night, Georgia hosts her elegant club event. Meanwhile, Ginny heads to Joe's Cafe. Padma performs a hauntingly emotional song about her feelings for Marcus, bringing everyone to tears, especially Cynthia, who breaks down crying. Joe tries to lighten the mood with a stand-up comedy routine, but he's terrible at it. Still, his awkward jokes manage to make Cynthia laugh for the first time in a while. Then, Marcus encourages Ginny to go on stage and perform her poem. She does, and the entire room goes quiet. In her poem, Ginny speaks directly to her mother, saying that while a mother's job is to protect her children, she often doesn't realize how much pain she causes them in the process. Ginny says she's exhausted from staying silent, from carrying the guilt of her mother's actions, and from living under the weight of crimes committed in their name. She ends the poem declaring that she's done being quiet, that she will scream, and finally let out every buried word. Just then, Georgia walks into the cafe, arriving right as Ginny finishes her poem. She stands frozen, listening to the last lines, realizing for the first time how deeply she's hurt her daughter and how little she truly knows about her. She leaves the cafe devastated, driving home in tears. After the show, Joe and Cynthia stay behind talking. There's a spark between them, a quiet moment of attraction. But just as it grows, Cynthia pulls away, guilt washing over her as she remembers her sick husband waiting for her at home. The next day, Austin is in class when a man walks in and introduces himself to the teacher as Gil. Austin freezes the moment he hears the name, turns around, and sees his father standing right there, his face lighting up with pure happiness. The following morning, Georgia wakes up feeling depressed, convinced that Ginny hates her and that she's ruined her daughter's life. She spends the whole day withdrawn and quiet. Seeing her like that, Ginny feels guilty and worries her mother will sink deeper into sadness because of her, so she offers to go shopping together after work to cheer her up. Georgia agrees, though she can barely fake a smile. At school, Ginny sits with Marcus and tells him her mom's been sad because of her. Marcus reassures her, saying her mom is strong and mature. She'll be fine. Later, Ginny walks with Maxine and the others, accidentally leaving behind her journal, the one where she writes all her thoughts and feelings. Marcus notices and picks it up to keep it safe. Meanwhile, Georgia is busy organizing the winter charity event, dressing Paul up as Santa Claus so families can take pictures with him and share what they need for the holidays. Across town, Ginny is finishing her shift at the cafe when Georgia arrives to pick her up for their shopping trip. Ginny tries to apologize for the poem she performed, but Georgia refuses to talk about it, afraid she'll lose control and start crying. The story flashes back to a past Christmas when Georgia was dating Gil. He was charming, kind, and adored Ginny, buying her anything she wanted. Georgia genuinely seemed happy with him. In the present, Georgia and Ginny decide to visit Zion, but they're surprised to find his girlfriend Simone there. Georgia becomes tense, but does her best to stay polite, even inviting them to spend Christmas together. Simone declines, saying she'll be with her family, and Zion adds that he'll spend it with his parents. Georgia quickly suggests they all come to her place to celebrate together. Zion agrees, making her even more anxious. She can't believe she'll have both Zion's and Paul's families in the same house, especially since neither of them really likes her. At home, Austin searches through his mom's things, looking for the letters he once wrote to his dad. Instead, he finds a gun hidden in one of Georgia's drawers. Shocked, he carefully puts it back. Elsewhere, private investigator PI discovers that Georgia's inheritance lawyer is the same man who represented her back when she was married to Anthony, and that he's connected to a well-known criminal organization. When the night of the charity event arrives, Georgia is glowing as everything goes according to plan, until she spots PI among the guests. He corners her, revealing what he's uncovered about her lawyer, and warning that if he digs deeper, he might find even more. Georgia stays composed, telling him he won't find anything that can hurt her. Meanwhile, at Joe's cafe, Cynthia shows up to see Joe. She apologizes, saying what happened between them was a mistake that can't happen again, and leaves quickly, guilt all over her face. Back at the charity event, Paul pulls Georgia aside for a private talk. He admits he's upset. He found the gun in her apartment, saw the personal photo she posted online without his approval, and was embarrassed when she invited everyone to sit on his lap for Santa pictures. He tells her he feels like a joke, like she's turning him into a clown for attention. Georgia defends herself, saying she did it all to help his image. Every woman who took a photo with him will remember his name and vote for him later. Paul snaps, saying she shouldn't treat him like he's clueless. He was the mayor long before she came along and will still be mayor without her. Georgia apologizes sincerely, but Paul, still angry, walks away to finish the event. The next day, Marcus visits Ginny before leaving to stay with his grandparents. He gives her back the journal she left behind, with a small drawing he made on the cover. He assures her he never opened it. Ginny smiles softly, thanking him before watching him leave. Ginny goes to help her mother in the kitchen, but Georgia is visibly tense, torn between having Paul's family and Zion's family under the same roof. When Ginny offers to help, Georgia snaps, saying she doesn't need it and accusing her daughter of hating her. Ginny quietly asks if she even listened to the poem or understood what it meant, sensing that her mother never really did. Georgia, overwhelmed, plays the victim and shuts down the conversation. Ginny, frustrated, leaves her and goes upstairs, where she spots a lighter on the table. Without thinking, she takes it, goes to her room, and once again tries to burn herself, lost in her pain. Downstairs, both families begin to gather. The tension is immediate. Zion's mother takes the chance to humiliate Georgia in front of everyone, saying she's uneducated, that she ran away when they tried to help her, and that she's the reason Ginny has so many problems, because she's failed as a mother. Georgia fights back through tears, saying she must have done something right since she's sitting there in a beautiful home with children who have everything they need. But the hurt is too deep, and she excuses herself, heartbroken, leaving the house to get some air. She ends up at Joe's cafe, where she finds him alone on Christmas night. They talk quietly, and Georgia is surprised he's by himself during the holidays. Joe admits he's lonely too. Overwhelmed, Georgia hugs him tightly, saying she just needed that, a simple hug before she walks away. Moments later, Cynthia walks in, also looking lost. Joe offers her a drink, and their conversation turns intimate. There's clear attraction between them, and by the end of the night, they give in and start an affair. The next morning, Austin wakes up beaming, thrilled by his Christmas gifts. He performs a magic trick for Georgia and Paul, who laugh and cheer. But Georgia freezes when she realizes where he learned it, from Gil, Austin's father. Then suddenly, there's a knock at the door. When Georgia opens it, Gil is standing there, smiling. Her whole body goes cold. Paul immediately senses the danger and grows protective, clearly uneasy about Gil's presence. Before leaving, Gil apologizes for his past mistakes and insists he only wants to know his son. Georgia doesn't respond. She's paralyzed, holding back panic as he walks away. Moments later, she collapses into a full-blown panic attack. Searching for something to focus on, she sees Ginny's notebook lying nearby. She opens it, and her face drains of color as she realizes her daughter has been hurting herself. Trembling, she calls Zion, only to find out he already knew and kept it from her. Furious, she hangs up immediately and races upstairs to Ginny's room. She bursts in crying, frantic, demanding to see the marks. Ginny tries to calm her, begging her to stop, but Georgia is hysterical. tugging at her clothes to check for burns. Ginny finally breaks down and admits how it all started, explaining that the self-harm wasn't really about her mother, but about the pain she couldn't express. Georgia falls apart completely, hugging her tight and apologizing through tears for never seeing the signs. That night, they stay together in the same bed, silent but closer than they've been in months. The next day, Ginny visits Marcus after he's returned from his grandparents. She can tell he's distant and sad, but doesn't push him to talk. Meanwhile, Gil shows up at Georgia's house asking to take Austin out to a game. Georgia refuses outright, terrified, and tells him to stay away from her son. Later, when Georgia goes to pick up Austin from school, she's blindsided. Gil is already there, chatting with the other moms and publicly pressuring her to let him spend time with his son. Cornered and humiliated, Georgia reluctantly agrees, though she's clearly terrified. The episode flashes back to Georgia's past with Gil. Back then, she was impressed by his success. He was charming, confident, and drove an expensive car. But one night, he confessed that his wealth came from embezzling small amounts from his company, just enough to stay undetected. Georgia hid her disgust and pretended to accept it, even as she realized the kind of man he really was. At school, Ginny spends the day searching for Marcus, but can't find him anywhere. That evening, she goes to her father's house to meet his girlfriend, Simone, who turns out to be a defense attorney. Ginny asks her bluntly if she ever feels guilty defending people she knows are guilty. Simone replies calmly that sometimes there are human reasons behind bad choices, like a thief who steals because he's starving, and that everyone deserves the chance to explain themselves, no matter how wrong their actions seem. That night, Ginny returns home and spots Marcus waving at her from his window. She asks if he's okay since she didn't see him at school, and he tells her he went home early. Moments later, his dad walks into his room and casually asks about his day. Marcus lies, saying it was fine, clearly skipping school without anyone realizing. The next morning, Ginny sits with her friends at school during break, chatting about their homework, when suddenly Marcus shows up, completely drunk. His behavior is erratic, his words slurred. Maxine immediately panics and rushes to take him home. Just then, Georgia arrives to pick up Ginny for their therapy session, forcing Ginny to leave before she can check on him. At the session, Georgia decides to stay with Ginny and sit in together. The therapist encourages Ginny to open up and share her feelings with her mother. Ginny hesitates at first, then finally speaks. She tells Georgia she feels like her mother never truly listens, never tries to understand her, and always steals the spotlight wherever she goes. She says Georgia dominates every space she's in, controlling everything and everyone, and never gives her any room to breathe or figure out who she is. Georgia sits there stunned, realizing for the first time how her strength has suffocated her daughter. She apologizes through tears and promises to do better, to be both a mother and a friend from now on. They leave the session lighter, smiling for the first time in a while. Later that day, Ginny heads to Joe's cafe. To her surprise, she finds Gil sitting at a table. She greets him politely and offers to take his order. As they chat, Cynthia walks in, notices him, and strikes up a conversation, asking if he's Austin's father. Gil confirms it and cynically adds that he hates Georgia too. He tells Cynthia that Georgia stole money from his company and framed him for it, which is why he ended up in prison. Cynthia listens intently and nods, saying she believes him because Georgia once stole from the mayor's office, and no one believed her either. They agree to talk again soon, clearly finding comfort in their shared hatred of Georgia. Meanwhile, Maxine calls Ginny, worried about Marcus. Ginny immediately heads to his house to check on him. She finds him disoriented but insists she's not there to lecture him. She gently tells him she won't push for answers, but promises she'll always be there for him. The next day, Ginny is scheduled to present her chosen book in front of the class. But when her turn comes, she freezes, realizing she doesn't owe anyone this performance. She turns to the teacher and firmly says she won't do it. She refuses to be used as the token student or do extra emotional labor just to make others feel better. She walks out mid-class, stunning everyone. Maxine quickly follows her, praising her bravery, but Ginny snaps back, saying Maxine always supports her only after she's already spoken up, never before. Maxine apologizes, realizing she's right and that she's taken Ginny's courage for granted. Meanwhile, Georgia heads to Joe's cafe but finds it completely dark. Suddenly, the lights switch on and everyone yells, "Surprise!" It's a bachelorette party that Ginny organized for her mother, bringing all her friends together to celebrate. The atmosphere is filled with laughter, drinks, and dancing. For the first time in a while, Georgia feels loved and accepted, but the warmth doesn't last long. When she gets home later that night, she realizes Austin isn't there. Panic floods her face as she checks the GPS tracker she always keeps with him. It's gone. Moments later, Gil walks in with Austin, calm and smiling as if nothing's wrong. Georgia tries to hide her fear, asking where they were, but Gil challenges her, demanding to know what harm could possibly come to Austin when he's with his own father. She says nothing, trembling, then storms into her bedroom afterward. Once alone, Georgia opens a drawer and pulls out her gun. Her hands shake as she stares at it, memories flooding back. The night she covered up bruises from Gil's abuse, pretending everything was fine while celebrating Ginny's birthday. Tears fill her eyes as she wipes away the makeup that once hid his violence. The next morning, Marcus wakes up with Ginny beside him. He looks distant, his face heavy with sadness. Despite having people who care about him, he admits to himself he feels empty and alone, consumed by a loneliness he can't explain, except for the quiet belief that the real problem is him. That night, Joe is closing up the cafe when Padma leaves, only to stumble upon Marcus outside, drunk and disoriented. Worried, she rushes him inside, makes him drink some water, and waits with him until he's steady enough to go home. Later, Marcus apologizes to her for how their relationship ended without explanation. He admits that he's just not built for love, that he hurts everyone who gets close to him, and before he can say more, Maxine arrives to help him upstairs. The next day, Paul prepares to present his budget proposal to the community. He knows people are upset, especially over the small education budget. During the meeting, parents demand more funding for schools, but Georgia, thinking on her feet, steps in and proposes a new idea, a school project initiative where students' work will be showcased online and all profits will go back to the school. Her charm wins everyone over instantly, and the parents applaud the plan. After the meeting, Georgia abruptly leaves, clearly rattled. Zion tries to understand what's wrong, but she brushes him off, insisting she can handle everything herself. Meanwhile, at the cafe, Cynthia sits with Joe when Georgia walks in looking tense and orders a drink. Moments later, Gil follows her inside and sits beside her. Joe's instincts kick in. He doesn't trust Gil and warns Cynthia that the man gives him a bad feeling. Cynthia immediately realizes Joe isn't really paying attention to her. His eyes are all on Georgia. Frustrated, she lashes out, accusing him of still being in love with Georgia, and tells him to be thankful she'll never marry someone as good and naive as him. She storms out, leaving Joe speechless. Back at school, parents arrive to pick up their kids. Outside, Cynthia sees Georgia and Gil arguing, things escalating fast, as Gil raises his voice and moves toward her aggressively. Without hesitation, Cynthia steps in, making up an excuse to pull Georgia away. The two women leave together, tension thick in the air. That evening, Ginny finishes her shift at the cafe when Detective P.I. suddenly appears. He calmly tells her he wants to talk about her mother's first husband, Anthony, hinting that there's more to that story than she knows. Later that night, Joe decides to make amends with Cynthia. He visits her at home and admits that he does love Georgia, but never meant to use her or hurt her feelings. Cynthia smiles sadly and tells him she's not angry. They both needed something they couldn't have with the people they actually love, and that's okay. They part amicably, promising to stay friends. Meanwhile, Austin is at Cynthia's house, playing hide-and-seek with her son, Zach. He hides inside a closet, but when he peeks through the door, he sees something that freezes him in place. Cynthia enters her husband's room and does something to his medical machines. Austin's eyes widen in horror as he realizes she's ending his life. He waits silently until she leaves, then hides somewhere else, terrified. At school, Ginny attends her friend's theater performance. She notices Marcus acting distant and distracted, and afterward, she pulls him aside to talk. Marcus, clearly drained, admits that he doesn't have the energy to maintain a relationship, not because he doesn't love her, but because she's the only thing keeping him happy. And that kind of pressure isn't fair to either of them. Ginny, hurt and confused, refuses to accept it and walks away, feeling betrayed. Later that night, Marcus returns home, consumed by sadness. Maxine tries to comfort him, and then, suddenly, a loud gunshot rings out from George's house next door. The scene flashes back 3 days earlier. Gil has been blackmailing Georgia, threatening to expose her criminal past to Paul unless she pays him. Desperate to protect her new life and engagement, Georgia panics, realizing everything she's built could collapse. She turns to Cynthia for help, and Cynthia reassures her that she's already added Gil to the local real estate blacklist. That means he won't be able to rent or buy property anywhere nearby, effectively driving him out of the area, and hopefully out of their lives for good. Afterward, Cynthia decides to confide in Georgia about her affair with Joe, admitting she deeply regrets cheating on her husband, even though she knows he'll never wake up again. Georgia listens quietly, realizing that Cynthia's guilt isn't about morality, but about still being tethered to someone who's already gone. Then the scene flashes back to the moment when Georgia sneaks into Zach's father's room and quietly ends his life. She does it not out of malice, but because she sees Cynthia's agony, the endless waiting, the empty life, and decides to free her in the only way she knows how. For Georgia, this is love twisted into mercy, a dark way of helping the people she cares about. After returning home, Georgia immediately notices a shift in Austin's behavior. He's quiet, withdrawn, and avoids her gaze. She doesn't understand why. Later, she goes upstairs and finds Ginny crying in her room, heartbroken after Marcus broke up with her. Georgia tries to comfort her, but before she can, she hears the front door open downstairs. Thinking it's Paul coming home early, she goes down smiling to tell him that Ginny is upset and could use a hug. But instead of Paul, it's Gil. Without warning, Gil attacks her, slamming her against the wall. Ginny rushes down when she hears the noise, panicked. Before she can intervene, Austin appears, holding the gun. The moment he sees his father hurting his mother, he fires. The bullet hits Gil in the arm, and chaos fills the room. Georgia grabs the gun, shaking, and orders Gil to get out. When Ginny tries to call the police, Georgia stops her immediately, terrified for Austin's sake and because the gun isn't registered. Instead, she tells Ginny to clean up the mess and keeps Austin away from his father. She stitches Gil's arm herself with trembling hands, saying nothing, while Austin silently draws a picture, one of himself, Ginny, Georgia, and Paul, his idea of the family he wishes he had, far away from violence. Later, Paul comes home, sensing something off. The house is spotless, too spotless, and everyone's acting like nothing happened. Suspicion flickers in his eyes, but he says nothing. Upstairs, Georgia sits on the edge of her bed, assuring her children that everything will be okay, that no matter what happens, they'll stay together against the whole world. That night, after they fall asleep, Georgia calls the wedding planner and calmly asks to cancel the ceremony. Her voice doesn't shake. She's made up her mind. Once again, she's preparing to run. Meanwhile, Detective P.I., frustrated after failing to find solid evidence linking Georgia to any crime, starts packing up his things to leave town. But then, by sheer chance, he hears that Georgia was at Cynthia's house the night Zach's father died. The timing matches too perfectly. He immediately suspects foul play and reports it to the police as a potential homicide. The next day, Ginny drags herself through school, numb from her breakup with Marcus. She can't concentrate, can't smile, can't speak to anyone. When she gets home, Georgia tries to cheer her up, describing a beautiful city she once visited, a quiet town by a volcano with a lake so still it looked like glass. She talks about how peaceful it felt there, how it could be a perfect place to start over. Ginny listens, sadness heavy in her voice, and says softly that it sounds like a beautiful city. Moments later, Maxine shows up, urging Ginny to come out with her. But as soon as Ginny is alone, she remembers her mother's story and realizes that Georgia is planning to run away again. She calls the wedding planners, pretending to be her mother, and confirms her suspicion. The wedding has been canceled. That evening, Ginny waits for Georgia to come home. When she finally arrives, Ginny confronts her, asking why she canceled the wedding. Georgia, already exhausted, says they can't stay there anymore, not after what Gil did. She insists they're never safe, that leaving is the only way to protect the family. Ginny, holding back tears, tells her that running isn't protection. It's a prison they've both been living in for years. She tells her mother she deserves to be happy for once, to stop running and face her life. Face Paul, and be honest about everything. Ginny tells her that if Paul loves her, he'll stay, and if he doesn't, they'll leave together. But at least this time, Georgia will know she tried. For the first time, Georgia listens. She nods slowly, finally convinced, and decides to take Ginny's advice. The next day, she sits down with Paul and lays her entire past bare. Her voice trembles as she tells him everything. How she framed Gil and sent him to prison. How she opened credit cards in her children's names. How she once joined a robbery crew as a teen. How she stole from the mayor's office but replaced the money before getting caught. Then, she tells him about the night Gil attacked her and how Austin shot him with a gun she wasn't supposed to have. By the time she finishes, tears fill Paul's eyes. Georgia braces herself for rejection, but all he does is take her hand. Paul is left speechless, utterly shattered by everything he's just heard. The woman he loves, the one he thought he knew better than anyone, turns out to have a past full of lies, crimes, and secrets. He quietly stands up, unable to process it all, and walks out, leaving Georgia alone in silence. The next morning, Georgia and Ginny wait anxiously by the phone, hoping for some sign from Paul. Hours drag on until the call finally comes. Paul's voice is calm but distant. He asks Georgia to come to his office. Panic floods her chest. She's convinced he's turned her in, that the police will be waiting to arrest her the moment she steps inside. Ginny, terrified, begs her mother to run away again while there's still time. But Georgia shakes her head. She says Paul deserves to hear her out face to face and that she's done running. With trembling hands, she drives to the office. As she steps inside, her worst fear seems to come true. Paul is there, and beside him stand two police officers. Georgia's heart stops. She asks if he called them on her. But before he can answer, Gil walks in unexpectedly. Paul turns to him with cold authority and warns him to stay away from his wife and her children. He tells him plainly that if he comes near them again, he'll make sure he ends up back in prison, and hands him a lawyer's number to arrange supervised visitation with Austin. Georgia realizes, through tears, that Paul didn't betray her. He protected her. Despite everything he knows, he's chosen to stand by her. She's stunned, overwhelmed with relief, and joy floods her face for the first time in what feels like forever. She rushes home to tell Ginny, and they both burst into laughter and tears as Georgia says that Paul still wants to marry her. Days later, the wedding day finally arrives. Ginny personally arranges every detail: the flowers, the lights, even the horse-drawn carriage her mother always dreamed of. Georgia looks radiant, a picture of happiness as she rides to meet Paul. When they lock eyes, everything else disappears. They say their vows, promising each other a new beginning, one without lies, one built on love and truth. For a brief moment, Georgia finally gets the life she's always wanted. Meanwhile, across town, Nick is getting dressed for the wedding when he notices P.I. packing a bag instead of preparing to leave for the ceremony. Curious, Nick asks if he isn't going. The detective takes a deep breath and says there's something he has to confess. He tells Nick his real name and that he's not a friend or colleague. He's an investigator who came to town to watch Georgia Miller. He lays everything out: her criminal past, his suspicion that she murdered Tom, Cynthia's husband, and all the evidence he's gathered. Nick stands frozen, realizing the truth too late. That night, just as Georgia and Paul share their first dance as husband and wife, flashing red and blue lights appear outside. The music stops. Police officers flood the venue, and the guests gasp in horror as they place Georgia in handcuffs. She's arrested on suspicion of killing Tom Fuller. The scene freezes. Georgia standing in her wedding gown. Ginny and Austin cry helplessly in the crowd, while Paul yells for a lawyer, his own face pale with disbelief. Guests whisper, cameras flash, chaos erupts. As Georgia is led away, her eyes lock with Ginny's. A silent apology, a mother's final look of love. And just like that, the perfect fairy tale she built from lies and survival collapses. The second season of Ginny and Georgia ends with the woman who ran her whole life finally unable to run anymore, caught not by her enemies, but by her own past.